the guy who has become the guy has rarely been the guy. And even though, we will find out a lot about Noah Kim once the season starts, because some guys are gamers. Noah Kim may or may not be the guy, but I will be stunned if he's not the starter. I don't know if they have the difference makers yet to be a defense that causes problems week in and week out, but it sounds like they think they have the depth not to be a sieve anymore. This should be the best defense they've had. I mean, you can still get 4-star dudes. It's just figuring out what your model is going to be. Keep them because of NIL, even if you don't recruit NIL. Have a good NIL system. I'm not saying you don't have that. But instead of recruiting with it, keep them with it.
Man, our long wait for Graham Couch is over. I'm so glad to have you, man. The eve of Michigan State football, and we finally got you here of all nights, man. Welcome here, finally.
Thanks for having me. You showed my 4 coherent clips I've ever...
Oh, those are the 4.
Yeah, that's it.
Look, I got to say, your coverage the past week has been really, really good, and I'm a Couch in the Rube guy, but I've been really diving into it lately because there's so much intrigue with this particular team. I want to get to the sort of big picture preview that I think most people are looking for and expecting in a minute. But you were not creating the news, but you helped foster the creation of the news with this Mel Tucker piece. I'm sure you're somewhat aware of your resonance with this LSJ interview, and Mike Valenti did a big thing on it. It was the talk of Twitter. It was picked up in multiple outlets. You sat down with Mel Tucker. You had this discussion. How did that go? How did that sort of happen? Take me into the room with Mel Tucker there.
Yeah, I'd been trying to set up a one-on-one with him for a little while, and it just worked out that particular Monday. And I think they had he wasn't in a great mood when it started. It was in his office. I think they had a practice that didn't go as he wanted it, and so he wasn't. His voice was grovelly. Sounded just beaten down by the day a little bit late in fall camp, as coaches sound. And so I'm looking to do a piece on heading into year 4, where the program is, where he is, the team, all that. Let the conversation sort of take it where it goes. I've got some things I want to get to. And so we sat down and, it was just sort of getting the regular stuff on the season and the team and stuff we'd heard through media days and press conferences. And at some point, he mentioned that they, I'm trying to remember which came first, but it was either that they were a year behind on NIL or that, other schools were paying their guys 12 or 13, and he just started dropping lines like that, which was very clear that when a coach does that, and Mel Tucker's not somebody who says things on accident, he wasn't afraid to have these things out there. And the line that really stuck with me was the one about the idea that you didn't know how you could expect to be great and have championships if you weren't, paraphrase, I don't remember exactly, be great in every area, and sort of referencing to the level of resources in NIL that existed, especially in recruiting and whatnot. And that jumped at me right away. But it was just a normal sort of, we've been trying to set something up for a while. That Monday worked in his office, and we sat down for like half an hour. And good conversation, went a number of ways, talked about the quarterbacks, other things. But I knew when I left that was the stuff. And I didn't know, what stir it would cause, but I knew that would catch people's eye because it was stuff he had not said before. And that was interesting.
There were 2 sort of divergent reactions to it. And that was, I would argue, by far the biggest takeaway was that NIL piece. That's what people were talking about. There's this camp that was saying, this is a call to arms. He's keeping it real, and he's telling you what you need to hear. And hey, if you want to be with the big boys, he's telling you what we need. And then there's the divergent camp from that is, hey, you're making $9.5 million a year. What are you bitching about? This is your job. The Valenti thing we'll play in a second, but get up on the table and raise the money if you need it. I mean, do you have a take on that? Did you get the sense it was more a call to arms or more of him bemoaning and complaining about this?
I think there was a little of both, because I think it was a letting people know there is a level you need to get to. His tone was there's a little bit of bemoaning in there, because I think that, but I do think he's hoping people see that and understand that there's things that aren't being done, that they don't have that other places do. And one of the things that's interesting about Mel Tucker, and I don't know that this helps him with the Michigan State job. I don't know that his other stops help him. So you think about where he's been with the Georgia, the Alabamas, the Ohio States, the LSUs. Those are places that are just different with football than Michigan State. It's different culturally as schools. And I think that, Michigan State's never going to be what they are in terms of, it's just a different fan base. It cares about different things. It's a different school. And so when you come from those places and those are your experiences, I think you can run into some frustrations if that's what you're trying to model.
Well, when he was hired here, he talked openly about national championships. And I've had players on the team, staffers from the team on the show, and I always like to point out the contrast. So when Mark D'Antonio was hired in 06, but ahead of 07, he talked about winning the Big Ten and going to the Rose Bowl. That was the talking point. I don't think he ever said the word national championship in that first year. People thought that was absurd. At the time, coming off John L., kind of seemed absurd. There's no talk of national championships. Mel, I don't know that he's mentioned much about Big Ten championships. I know certainly more of the emphasis was national championships. And I've talked to guys on the show saying, can you really compete with Georgia, Alabama? Does he really believe that? To a man, they've all said yes. I wonder do you sense he's had a little bit of a rude awakening where, wow, this is going to be harder than I thought because I'm coming from the Georgia, Alabama background?
Yeah, I think he's learning more about the Michigan State fan base. It's spring games where you only have 5,000 people, and it's just different, right? You got to know this culturally on a cold day on April 1st or whatever it is. People don't want to be out there as much. They're just not into it year round as much. Yeah, I'm sure there have been a number of awakenings. I still believe that, like the D'Antonio era, the national championship was much more mythical at that time anyway. It was a BCS voted thing. The Big Ten and the Rose Bowl was still more of a pure thing that existed, and Michigan State fans hadn't been there in a while. Like, I still wonder with the Rose Bowl in 2013, because if the playoff starts a year later, or a year earlier rather, there are questions whether Michigan State would have been in it, and it's a whole different dynamic. But I think there are a lot of people who would not trade that Rose Bowl experience for a national championship. Now, there are a lot who would, but that was that was all of Spartan Nation descending on Pasadena. It was quite a pilgrimage out there, and it was so I think for Mel, I am sure there are some rude awakenings, but I'm sure there are some lessons he's learned. He's realized he's just learned the campus. He's learned the limitations that exist to some degree. I don't know that if he thinks he still can't do it. And I think the expanded playoff helps that tremendously, because in future years, especially with the new Big Ten, winning the Big Ten is going to be a lot harder than getting to the expanded playoff and then maybe making a run in that playoff if you've got the right kind of team in December and January. It's a good question. I haven't asked him that specifically, and maybe next time we'll see if I can, rile people up with that. Maybe he'll say there's just no chance here or something like that.
The Rainier Saban piece in the Freight, I don't know if you caught that, was one of the more scathing pieces I've read on any topic in sports in the last 5 years in town. It was way up there. It was brutally scathing. I don't know. Did you catch the Saban piece?
Yep.
So you know what I'm talking about. I thought it was pretty. I don't know if it was harsh. It's it's the guy's opinion, and that's fine. But it was pretty scathing. And Rainier's big thing was there seems to be this conflict if you came here saying no excuses. If you can't recruit here, you can't recruit anywhere. It takes what it takes. All the Trevor Moawad stuff, and now you're talking to a longtime columnist at the LSJ saying, "Oh, we don't have what we need here," and it's kind of there is a disconnect there. Do you think that criticism was fair?
Where I disagreed with the column was this. Number one, a lot has changed in college football since he took the job. So the points on NIL wasn't a thing when Mel Tucker takes the job. So that's sort of your initial quote. So the premise, that was the issue I had with the column. I also am not a big fan of holding coaches accountable for everything they say in introductory press conferences. It's like that is pomp and circumstance. You're trying to rile everybody up. You've just gotten the job. You don't even really know the program you've taken. You've just flown out. 24 hours earlier, you're leading a different team. You only know so much. You may think this is a place you can do it. You're there all those years earlier with Saban. You know the Big Ten, but you don't you don't know what you don't know yet, but you're going to say all the right things. You're not going to come in and say, yeah, I really just need to learn for a year. We'll figure it out. Ask me later. So that's the problem with it. It is interesting with program momentum, though. A year ago, when they're coming off the 11-2 and everybody's high, and there were some donor relationships that had been tapped into that hadn't before, some things reawakened, especially, COVID, people got separated and all that stuff. It felt like there was momentum, and I sat down with him a year ago, and I think he felt like there was momentum that was getting them places. But they weren't recruiting with NIL yet at that point. They were a little, and he wasn't, at that point, he was still very much skeptical of NIL and the promises being made by other schools and whether they would come to fruition and what that meant for players. And so I think the other thing, one thing that didn't make the story that he said is, agents, players, parents, coaches, nobody knows exactly where this is going. Nobody knows the exact model that'll exist. Alan Haller said to me that he's not sure 5 years from now collectives exist the way they do now. And so I think that's the other hard thing. You are on a sort of a moving target. I mean, you can say this is what needs to be done today, and 2 years from now, that may not be the model that gets it done. I think what they need to do is you got to decide what you want to be, who you want to be, and then just try to be the best version of that.
If they are, in fact, a year behind, let's take him at his word. Whose fault is it that they're a year behind? It's somebody's fault.
Yeah, well, if it's somebody's fault if that's the way you want to do it. I think for a while, that's not how they wanted to do it. So fault is to assume that this was always going to be the path, right? And even when he said it, I don't know that I felt that he was, like, I didn't feel a year ago he was frustrated by that. If they were a year behind. In other words, it's not like, so
they were winning. That helps.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And yeah. So I don't know whose fault it is. But I do know just from the early NIL days, they were really hell-bent on doing this the right way by the letter of the law. And that, Michigan was the same way. And, other school, I mean, Ryan Day's made similar comments to, what Mel Tucker made about the amount of money. And there are a lot of places that feel a little, wait a second, this isn't what this is supposed to be. And so, I mean, I don't personally have a problem with saying that's not how we're going to operate. But if you do say that's not how we're going to operate, then you have to understand there is a consequence to that in terms of the program you might be, the type of program. Now, it doesn't mean, like, you could easily say, we are going to try to develop a strong NIL program that works with our current players, but not with recruits. We get them here. There's retention, and we develop them as pros. We get enough 4 stars, and every couple of years we're in the thick of the playoff, and we've got a chance once in a while to make a run. I think that you can make an argument, and I think people would be pretty satisfied if you did that. I think the problem right now is you've got 5-7 last year. You've got people not feeling great about the program, and I think all those things. So, I mean, if they would have been 9-3 last year, people would listen to him and think he knows what he's doing. Now they listen to him and it's sour grapes.
And I think that's a fair takeaway, even if it's not accurate. That's a reasonable response. Speaking of responses, reasonable or not, Mike Valenti was very fired up about your column and Mel's words in them. We pulled a little bit of a sampling of his reaction, which I think was a representative example of a large portion of the fan base. Ben, can you roll Mike Valenti for us, please?
So Mel Tucker did an extensive interview with Graham Couch, okay? Lansing State Journal. And 2 quotes came out of this that just kind of sent me to the roof because I don't think Mel Tucker is exemplifying leadership. NIL is a big issue right now. You've got teams in the conference spending $12-13 million on NIL. We're not even close to that, so it's a dogfight. Why? It sent me to the roof for this reason. You can make excuses for anything if you try hard enough. I don't do that. If you're Mel Tucker and you are one of the highest paid coaches in America, I'm sorry, were you blindfolded as the tsunami of NIL came to town?
So here's where I agree with them, although I'm not as mad about this as he is, and some are. It's not that big of a surprise that this thing was going to be corrupted. I thought it was inevitable that it would be corrupted. And I had Ant Wright, former Michigan basketball player, on here like 5 or 6 years ago talking about it when it was still just a possibility in the ether. And he and I both said, this is going to get corrupted in 5 seconds. So does he have a point there where, really, you were caught off guard by this? It seems like a fair criticism to me.
Yeah, no, it is. I mean, Mel Tucker's supposed to be the guy who understands college football at a higher level, right? He's the guy who's been at the programs, who understands. I mean, he's said in the column I wrote, I understand the players these schools are getting. I mean, he understands those cultures and what's going on there. Now, he hasn't recruited specifically with NIL at those places. I think the other thing is, you know, he's making $9.5 million, but some of that's coming from donors. And so if this is, you know, it's not just the optics. The optics aren't great when you're making $9.5 million and you complain about anything. It's also that if what's really needed is those donors to be giving to NIL, if player compensation is where this is going rather than coach compensation, you know, wouldn't it be better if you're at $7 million and the 2.5 or whatever it is that they're paying you from donors is going to the players, right? And so part of the thing is you're taking donor money as part of your salary, and the coach itself, if NIL is the way we're going, is less important. I mean, they just are. I mean, there is no need, to me, there are lots of good coaches out there. There's no need, if this is the path we're going down, to ever pay a coach again $9.5 million unless they truly are just the magic touch. But you know, I also understand why that happened. There are a lot of the reasons why we are at this moment with Michigan State football. And you know, when Mel Tucker won a little bit, and I don't know how real the interest in him was, but I know the fear that they would lose him was real, and that stems from the Saban era and the what ifs and all that sort of stuff. And you paid to avoid regret. NIL comes along, and you're right, it was always at some point going to be corrupted because people will do anything to see their teams win to some degree. And I do have questions about how much big-time donors are going to keep shelling out a lot of money year after year all around the country when there's really no return on your investment other than your team winning. I mean, it's just not – people aren't rich.
And that's maybe. The player might not even be good as an individual, let alone the team.
People aren't rich because they're stupid. And eventually it's like it's going to have to be much more – when they say collective, much more of a fan base effort collectively. So you got that. And then you have the situation going back to D'Antonio when he left, COVID, and where Michigan State's program is with the recruiting classes, which creates sort of where they are as a talent base. So all that comes together, and you have what you have. And what they really need right now is just a season where people feel a little better about things. They need a year where at the end of the year, the theme is, okay, they look like they're on their way. Whatever it is, wins, losses. Nobody thinks they're contending this year, I don't think. But at the end of the year, they look like they actually belong on the same field with Ohio State. They, you know, maybe they win it against Penn State at Ford Field. They leave November, whatever the record is, people go, okay, you can sort of see it right now. And that, more than anything, they just need different vibes. And that begins with just better play.
You said something on your show, Couch in the Rube, that I've been spinning on ever since I heard it about 24 hours ago. I still don't know what to make of this, so I'm going to dig into it. I was fascinated by the premise. So, Ben, let's roll Graham on his show talking about Michigan State deciding what they want to be and if they're facing some type of a self-identity crisis.
But you got to decide who you are and then be who you are. And if you want to be something else than who you are now, then the conversation that Mel Tucker's bringing up needs to be had. It involves more investment from everyone. And I don't think that's who MSU is, because I'm told Michigan State's a basketball school by a lot of people. And I don't believe you can be a school that cares about basketball the way Michigan State does and then do what Mel Tucker's talking about in football. And the reason for that is you have to ache for this shit.
So you think this is kind of a fool's errand, was my takeaway, that Michigan State, this is impossible to achieve what he's achieving, right? Because if you don't have that buy-in, you don't have that aching, it's impossible to accomplish what he's saying. Is that a fair takeaway from what you said?
Yeah, in the world where NIL is a substantial part, where player compensation and how much you can bring in is a huge part of getting to that level. I mean, because when you go back to the D'Antonio era before any of this existed, they were one recruiting class going a lot differently away from it seemed like taking that step a little bit. But yeah, I think one of the challenges that Michigan State has is that, you know, in November, regardless of what's happening on the football field, the Champions Classic happens. The basketball team, there's a lot of interest this year, and there's a lot of interest a lot of years. Tom Izzo changes the vibe. You got an escape, and you got one you care about. Most of those, you know, people will say that, well, you know, other schools have good basketball programs, but you know, they don't care about it as much. At Ohio State, they would trade anything that happens on the basketball court for another football win. I feel the same way about Michigan. There might have been a few years where things were really rolling under Beeline, where maybe that's a little, but for the most part, that's the way it is at Michigan. Even when Florida's winning national championships, they still didn't care about basketball. That's not the, and that, when you care about one thing so singularly as a fan base, then I think it makes a difference. It's where your priorities are. It's where your resources are. It's where your finances are going to donate. And at Michigan State, it will never be that way, even though, you know, I would argue, Tom Izzo would argue, some other people, that it's a football school in terms of what stirs the drink in certain ways. There's almost no place though that has the balance that Michigan State does between football and basketball fandom. And in most ways, that works out tremendously. Like, if I were a Michigan State fan should never trade that for anything. Like, the idea of that is incredible. I mean, you get to turn the page every year. Most places don't get to do that. They're stuck in one thing. In this particular instance, though, in terms of having enough just singular focus on football, you're never going to have it. That's my opinion.
Well, I mean, the argument for being able to get there, and I know it wasn't the NIL era, was you did have that, depending on which poll you look at, 3 consecutive top 5 finishes, or, you know, 2 top 5 and a 6th in that D'Antonio era, where 2013, I'm not going to do the blame the refs thing, but let's face it wasn't great in South Bend. That team could have been undefeated and could have been in a national championship scenario, and that was with D'Antonio getting a bunch of 2 and 3 stars in there, like with just a little bit of a bump. And I think Michigan State's already ahead of their resource-wise, even with the NIL era adjustment. Isn't that the argument for, okay, maybe even if you don't win it, you could be in the national championship game and, you know, lose by 7 or 10 or something? Like, I don't think that's impossible.
Or just in the playoffs regularly, and if you're in there somewhat regularly, you're going to have years where you can make the run. You're going to have the year like 2013 where all of a sudden you've got a team, you're like, hey, these guys can play with anybody. Yeah. I would argue the 2014 team, had it been in the playoff, would have had a shot. I mean, that was a really good team that just ran into J.T. Barrett on the wrong night, but in Marcus Mariota early in the year. And so, yeah, no, it can be done. The playoff, if you're getting to the playoff, people will be okay. I mean, fans will be okay. If you're if you're in the dance, people are going to be okay. And I think that's something that, because we aren't in that expanded playoff era yet, and it's not that it's going to be easy to get there, but they would have been there in 2021. They would have made the playoff, and so that lets you know the type of season you'd have to have. I think that's, you know, and if you do it repeatedly, then can you build from that? Is there a chance to take off? You know, maybe that's the way to go. You're right, because if D'Antonio does it for 2 or 3 more years from what they did, it would have been very interesting to see what would have, you know, what could have been sustained and how the program would have been seen. Because, you know, as good as they were for 6 years, in those 3 years, most people don't view Michigan State as a school that could win a national championship, which is fairly absurd given that they actually could have in 2 of those years at least, maybe. And but that's what you're fighting against, and you're probably fighting against that in recruiting and all sorts of things.
Yeah, I'm constantly back and forth. I don't think Michigan State can ever be Alabama, where they're ripping off 5 titles in 11 years or whatever that run was. So I'm not to that extreme where they can get there, but I'm not they can never win a national title either, because you just said why. Here's my sort of model in my head. And Ben, can you put up the graphic for us? Clemson. Mm-hmm. Clemson, if you look at their track record, was very, as the kids say, mid these days.
Yeah, Clemsoning was their thing.
That was a verb. But look at this. Look at this stat. So their run from 1991 to 2011. the record is what it is. Not that great, not bad, but they averaged 7.3 wins a year. They were constantly 7-5, 6-6, 8-4, 5-7. Their best AP finish in that entire 2-decade stretch was 16th. That's where they peaked. 13 of those 20 years they were unranked, but their best year, 16th. I think they went 9-3 that year. And then you look forward 2012 to the present, the record speaks for itself. 12 wins a year, AP top 10 7 times, 2 national titles, obviously. And their worst AP finish was, it's not even up there, so I can't tell you, I don't know. But the point is their contrast here is staggering.
Yeah.
And nobody can, you said it, Clemson was considered this blah. I mean, they were nothing. I grew up with Clemson being kind of like, an ACC, John L. Michigan State, like where they'd be interesting one year here or there. They got there where they were at Bama's level, at least for 4 or 5 years, if they're not still there. Remains to be seen. So why can't Michigan State aspire to that? Like, why can't they try to follow the Clemson model?
Well, no, you're right. I mean, Clemson doesn't have the basketball, whether it's a hindrance or not. They don't have that where they care about hoops. I think one thing that makes Michigan State fans, it bolsters the dream too, is what Clemson did in football to some degree, Michigan State, even over a longer period, did in basketball. So Michigan State is also one of the very few places that has experienced having a middling program and watching it rise to become nationally prominent and then do it over multiple decades. And so there is this idea that, yes, it can be done because, look, it's on our campus, so to speak. And so I think that is another thing. And then when it happens in a shorter window for D'Antonio, so it happened twice at your own school, and so this should, yes, this school is capable of doing this. And I think Michigan State's absolutely capable of being a school that wins regularly in football and is in the dance, in the conversation, and has teams that. How you get that done and what you are, though, you have to decide. And if they want to try to compete for 5 stars the way Alabama does and the way Georgia does, then that conversation needs to be had. And I think that's okay. I mean, it's okay for Mel Tucker to be blunt about that, to say, this is the game now, and we've got to sort of decide if this is the way we want to do it. It works if you spend enough. If we have the one thing Mel Tucker has going for him from talking to recruits and people in the program is there is a realness to what they're doing when kids show up. So what they see when they come on recruiting visits is what they get when they show back up. And I think, maybe not all the photos and the cars and everything, but generally they have a good feel for what they're walking into, which I think can help with retention, which I think is the real name of the game moving forward. If you can get, 4th and 5th year guys who have been part of your program who are really good recruits, then you're going to have a chance to win at the highest level. And when there's a lot of instability, a lot of places, and it's going to get harder in the Big Ten. But with 12 spots, there's going to be 3 Big Ten teams at least in every college football playoff starting next year. And so you just got to, you know what you have to do. You got to kind of be in that top 3, 4 at the lowest to get in.
So let's get it into this year. Transition to this. I don't think there's any way to start this other than the obvious question. The quarterback. You said in our show intro, I've heard it on your show a few times, shocked, stunned, very surprised if Noah Kim is not the guy. Is that where you are at right now as we are on the eve of the football season?
Not to snap one starter, I would be very surprised. Doesn't mean he'll be the guy. But I just, and again, I could be reading it wrong, but to me, if there's not a lot of separation, and I don't think there is a ton of separation, the guy who's waited his turn and is a guy they like a lot in a lot of ways, you put out there for the beginning. And I think you have a plan to play both. I would be surprised also if they didn't play both these first 2 weeks. I think it ultimately gets settled maybe the first 2 weeks, but really the 2 weeks after that. You're still at home. You're playing Washington and Maryland, 2 teams that can beat you, and you're going to need good quarterback play. And the thing is, we'll see it. Like, I always say about quarterbacks, it's not the coach's decision, it's not a fan's decision. It happens in plain sight. You know who the best guy is, and even if the coaches are stubborn and hang on for a while, eventually the best guy is clear to everyone, and so we'll find out who that is. I would be surprised if, though, Kim is not taking the first quarter snaps on Friday night.
So, I mean, maybe, I guess the better question is, who's the guy in week 5? I mean, that's maybe the better question, right?
And I don't think anybody really knows. Because,
I agree, yeah.
Because the thing is, you don't know what these guys are going to do when adversity strikes, right? I mean, what does Noah Kim do when he's under pressure for decisions? What does Katin Houser? Because one of the things when you listen to Mel Tucker that's really important is the guy who makes the most mistakes is not going to be the quarterback. So you can have all the talent in the world, but if you're a guy who's turnover prone, if you're somebody who tries to make too many plays and doesn't live for the next down, and so to speak, that's not the guy they want right now. Now, if you're such a playmaker, maybe they live with that sort of thing, and maybe there's separation that way. But I don't think we have any sense of it. And the history of Michigan State with quarterbacks is amazing. I mean, one of the reasons I think Katin Houser eventually could win the job is at some point the more heralded kid is going to win one of these. It didn't happen with Keith Nichol and Kirk Cousins. Damian Terry never got there. Messiah DeWeaver never got there. There have been a number of guys who wound up being were the guy that everybody wanted to see and never were the guy or just didn't have it. And, so at some point, the thing that's interesting about the quarterback battle to me, though, is Sam Levitt's presence. And I think that gives you freedom not to worry about keeping Houser happy. If Katin Houser winds up being the best quarterback, I think they'd be thrilled. And they'd be happy if he winds up being an All-American. But what you don't have to fear is Noah Kim is the better quarterback this year. He's won this job. Is Katin Houser going to leave the program? What do you do? We still like his ceiling a lot. You got a kid who's just as heralded right behind him, and I think that gives you, just not to worry about that sort of thing. I find also if you're a coach trying to figure out who's better now versus who could be better at the end of the year if they get to start. Like one of the problems with Peyton Thorne's situation and his frustration with having other guys, I think having the open competition. Well, part of it was how it was communicated to him. I think that could have been done a little bit better. But just because you've started 26 games and at times played okay, you haven't played well enough not to be challenged. And are you better than those other guys because you have 26 starts? Or are you actually better than those guys? And I think that's also something that as a coaching staff you have to look at. If you look at Katin Houser right now and you think all he needs is snaps to be a dynamic player, then you've got to factor that in everything as well.
You didn't have any issue with the Peyton Thorne decision in terms of it being a competition. It was just more of the delivery of the message.
Yeah, I mean, one of my big frustrations is like bad communication. It drives me nuts. And
how was it communicated that was poor? I honestly don't know.
It was said in a press conference before it said to Peyton Thorne.
Because I saw the quote from the unnamed source, which I assume was his dad, but I don't know. I was just speculating. But just, it was news to us kind of thing.
Yeah, and I heard that they basically said it in a pre-spring press conference before they said anything to Peyton. And when you got a guy at what's your most important position, and he's been your starter for 2 years, been in a lot of battles for you, he's won some games for you, lost some games for whatever. I just think he's owed the respect of saying, hey, it's always a battle. We're going to say this. We need people to feel that competition. We still like you. We still want you to be here. We want you to be part of this, and if we think there's a decent chance you'll win the job. He probably goes into that thinking, maybe not. Maybe he still transfers to Auburn, but at least he knows where you stand. I think there's something to hearing it publicly before you hear it privately, and that's what I think was the beginning of the frustration. I don't know if he would have stayed or not, though.
I was kind of bummed out by that whole thing because I'm like the Thorne apologist in the fan base probably, and I get so much shit for it. And even for saying that, I'm going to get texts from my buddies being like, leave him alone, like get off him, all that stuff. I think Thorne got way too much heat last year. Not saying he played perfect, but even just, you said a lot of battles for you. The guy's got the touchdown pass record at the school, or a school that's been around for over 100 years. So, can we give this guy a little respect for one? But I don't think his play was as poor last year as people made it out to be. He was scapegoated like this was all his fault or mostly his fault on that side of the ball. I don't think that's fair. No offensive line, no running game, right?
And I think
did I miss something?
No, that's part of the reason I think they didn't put Noah Kim in, too. The other thing is, and I think he was actually beat up and not 100% healthy, but they looked at this is the best chance to survive with all the other variables that are going wrong. And that probably deserves some respect, too. If you think, I can see from his perspective, he's thinking if you think Noah Kim is ready to surpass me when I'm banged up or when I'm not playing well and we don't have healthy receivers, the line's not very good, why didn't he go in? And Jay Johnson said this August that he felt comfortable, would have played Noah. I just don't. I think they thought Peyton Thorne gave him the best chance to hang in there, and they probably should have presented it to him a little differently. That said, as Mel Tucker stated in the column, they're not at a position. I thought he used the Aaron Rodgers situation where, like, everybody knows Aaron Rodgers is the New York Jets quarterback. He gets signed. This is the guy. He said, we're not there yet. And I don't know when we will be, but that he basically was saying that enough has not been done to have that sort of thing anointed on you. And I also think that's 100% fair.
So Mel Tucker's been here for 2 full seasons and really has not met or matched expectations in either one. 21 exceeded them by a mile. They were way better than anyone thought. 22, they were quite a bit worse. People thought maybe backslide to 8 or 9 wins. Nobody saw this coming. They were ranked, 11th at one point going into the Washington game. So we haven't really seen the, over-unders 4.5, they win 5. They've been kind of at 2 opposite ends of the spectrum. What's your take this year? Do you see them as, would you be more surprised if they went 4-8 or 10-2?
I'd be more surprised if they were 10-2.
So you think it's very on the board that this year gets bad?
It's possible. I don't think it will. I picked 6-6. I can see the path to 7-5. I think some of it hinges on the Maryland and Washington games if they can get one of those. But I can also see how it could spiral. And there's just so many unknowns. And I don't know that I've covered a year quite with this many, where you just go down the line, what is that going to look like? But in some ways, you don't look at any position either and go, they're definitely in trouble. You don't look at. We don't know about the quarterbacks. They may have 2 really good quarterbacks. That may be the problem right now, and sort of deciding it is they had 2 guys who are better than Peyton Thorne right now. Who knows? It would help tremendously if Nathan Carter is the real deal. I think if they have a running back, because I think back to 2021, and I think back to that play. I was sitting next to an Indianapolis Colts scout at Northwestern, and Kenneth Walker, and we had talked about a number of other things, but we had not talked about Kenneth Walker once. And he takes the ball 75 yards. And I think in that moment, everybody knew they were going to be okay. It was it wasn't just one run. It was okay, this guy is really good. They've been saying there was something about that run that just made you think, this is interesting. And they could use, and I know Central Michigan is probably not quite what Northwestern was supposed to be going into that season. They got a veteran defense or whatever. It's still a MAC opponent. But if they could have a day where you leave feeling really good about a player that you didn't know about, I think that would do wonders, sort of changing the vibe, starting things in the right direction, beyond just beating Central Michigan, which everybody's expecting they'll do.
I know Colton Pouncey was the first one that I read, because he was covering the beat at the time for The Athletic, was the first one I read talking about Kenneth Walker very early, in spring ball. But the Kenneth Walker pieces, Charbonneau, Solari, you guys were all talking about him before we knew, because you're up there, you're covering this team. Now, I don't know if anyone predicted exactly what happened, Walter Camp Player of the Year, but I knew going in from Colton, your coverage, Solari, Charbonneau, this guy seems pretty good. Everyone up there's buzzing. Maybe not to that level, but what is the buzz about Carter? Is it like this guy, oh shit, this guy's going to be really good, similar to Walker at least in nature?
Yeah, I mean, that's the hard thing is Kenneth Walker sets a pretty high standard for what that, but what I do think they have in Carter is sort of the complete back they haven't had, or they didn't have a year ago, where you've got a guy, sort of the natural vision, fast enough, strong enough to be a featured back, right? And that sort of, I don't know, they have not shied from being excited about him. But I also haven't heard the sort of quotes that, like, I think it was Xavier Henderson, forgive me if I get this wrong, but somebody said in spring practice, or whatever it was, one of the early practices with Kenneth Walker, worried they're really bad defensively. This guy's really good. And they just kind of knew, and then they started figuring out, because other guys were in there, okay, we're okay, we're not awful. They just couldn't deal with him. I haven't heard that sort of talk, but the interview process is a little different, setup's a little different. I also haven't asked guys the same. I haven't asked that particular thing, but I think he has a chance to be decent, and that would be huge. It would be huge if Malik Carr this is the year, he's healthy, light bulb is on, he's a real problem for defenses as a tight end, because that makes a lot of things easier for the quarterbacks. There are a lot of things that we could get a sense of. I know with a game like Central, it's more preventing red flags in the opener, but there are also things you could at least be intrigued by, that you feel good about coming in. And they need a few of those things to happen.
Well, talking about things that feeling good about, I had a polarizing take this week, but I mean it. I meant what I said, and I'll double down. I'm actually really excited for the defense. I've seen Scotty Hazelton coaching guys that thought they were never even going to play at certain points, and I still saw improvements despite how bad it was. I don't think it was his fault. And I was a student when people wanted Pat Narduzzi's head on a stake. I mean, that was like early Graham Couch days, right?
It was even before. It was like 2009, right? It was just.
Well, you were what, 11 when you came in?
12, yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
so they were the defense in 12 was already better than they were better than 13 actually statistically.
In some ways, yeah.
I mean, it depends which metric, but they were a little bit better than like the S&P plus. But whatever, they were great defensively. So you came in when it already turned. I was a student. I had graduated in 11, so I was at those games 2009. People wanted that guy gone. It was a hatred that we haven't seen for a coordinator here ever since. Became the best in school history, I would argue. So I'm wary of this whole fire the coordinator without looking at any mitigating circumstances. I think he's a hell of a coach. I see things that I like from him. The red zone defense throughout the year, especially in the Michigan game famously, I don't think he had much to work with, and I think he did a pretty good job. I'm a Scotty Hazelton guy. Now, for full disclosure, I have since had his wife on, like we're friendly. But I was saying all this 2 years before I met her. So, I mean, in fairness, I want to disclose that. But I'm a Hazelton guy. Am I crazy? What am I missing here?
No, I don't think you are necessarily. I don't, like, in 2021, I really liked the bend but don't break defense they did. And I think it takes a check of ego for a coordinator to play a defense that's going to give up a lot of yards and going to have a cushion, but this is the way to survive because the offense is good enough. We've got some guys who can create some turnovers. We can opportunistic with the sacks. I mean, I thought they played until the secondary and everybody got so beat up in November that they really couldn't compete for a couple weeks. I thought they played 2021 about as well as you could given the personnel. And last year, knowing what we sort of do now about the impact of Xavier Henderson, Darius Snow, there were several other injuries, Jacob Slade, things. I mean, they had really no shot given the depth they didn't have and how key those guys were. What I don't know yet about Hazelton, I mean, Hazelton's obviously a good enough coordinator. He's moved up. He's been a defensive coordinator at the Division I level in multiple schools. Is he a guy who can make chicken salad out of chicken shit, right? Because that was always my problem with Dave Warner. Dave Warner was a guy who, you give him the parts, he's fine. They averaged 43 points a game in 2014. He had all the parts. But he's not going to take a team that has the one wideout that needs to be featured and not a lot else and turn that into a successful offense. And the question with Hazleton still that it is yet to bear out and is can he really maximize the group? I think this is an important year because I think they do have some depth and some talent and perhaps some pros in that interior defensive line that can be difference makers. And they have experience at linebacker, and they've got some talent in the secondary that's young. And getting that group to actually be the reason you win some games more often. And the Illinois game last year, I think, was one where they were really good. And they had, so it's not like it's never happened.
Tough spot too, like on the road. And
so if you can get, but if there are, if they can have 3 or 4 wins this year where you look at it and you go, boy, the defense really. I'm not saying they have to be peak D'Antonio defense, but they need to turn that corner, I think.
So you landed on 6-6. What's sort of your high end? This goes really well. You said 7-5, 8-4, like best case.
Yeah, I mean the best case scenario to me, I don't think they probably win at Iowa, but is to win the home games before then. And I think they'll. I picked them to go 2-2 in those games, but and 3-1 probably more likely. But there's a chance that they're winning close games against Maryland and Washington, and then if you're in that situation, and then you get Rutgers after the bye week before the Michigan game, and Indiana, Nebraska, Minnesota are all, you look at those rosters and they're all winnable games. Everybody talks about how brutal the schedule is. It's tough, but there are some teams out there that have at least as many questions as Michigan State, teams that might be worse. And so you could see how, like, to me, 8-4 is sort of the ceiling based on, and we get stuff wrong before the year every year. Like, we don't know about 3 or 4 teams we thought were going to be good. We don't know about teams that are good or aren't that good. Every year, 2 SEC teams play on like the first week of the year. Both turn out to be crap, but we make one number 1 in the country because they won the game, right? That's sort of the way it goes. So Penn State could not be as good. They could not have the quarterback play, whatever. It could be there. But based on what I think Penn State, Michigan, and Ohio State are going to be, it's hard to imagine. And then the Iowa game on the road, the first road game, and what I think is going to be a really good Iowa team. Those 4 games are just hard to imagine them winning unless there's something to them that we don't know. And we don't know a lot, right? So, again, I could be wrong, but 8-4 seems like a ceiling to me. And I also think enough could go wrong that they need to win these first 2 games. They need to make sure they're 2-0. You don't want that vibe coming out.
That would be bad.
Yeah.
I mean, that would be bad. That would be tough to get back, honestly. But I don't think they're going to lose. I think they're starting 4-0. I actually think they're beating Washington. West, East, West. How often do those teams play well? Like twice in 30 years. Oregon went to Columbus, famously without Thibodeau a few years ago, popped them, and they controlled that game. That was a stunner. They were a double-digit underdog. Other than that, even when Arizona State beat us, Michigan State played better than Arizona State and East Lansing that year. They didn't play well. Arizona State didn't do anything the whole game. So that East to West or vice versa, those teams usually don't play well.
And then if they were to beat Washington, a lot of that's going to mean the defense is good.
Yes.
Because that's going to be a game where a lot of things are going to be tested. Like, I think the Central Michigan game is the ideal opener. It is not just because it's Central or whatever. I just think who this particular Central Michigan team is makes it the ideal opener in the sense that it's a veteran defense that might be the best defense in the MAC. They've got some really good, notable players there. But offensively, and so you want to be tested. You want your guys to be tested, right? You don't want this offense just to steamroll somebody and you think things might be good and they're really not. Offensively, though, I think they're pretty one-dimensional. And so what it will allow the defense to do is, can they control a line of scrimmage? Can they deal with quarterbacks that have mobility? And can they tackle in space in the secondary and all those sort of things that you need to do to have a good year? And then you sort of, by week 3, you add the passing component of a prolific quarterback in that sense, which you're going to see again in week 4. For week 3 and 4 right away. So, we'll learn about the pass rush, secondary, all that stuff by then.
Last question, then we'll get to our speed round. You've been up to, for one, I'll say I'm way more optimistic than you about this group, but I've been wrong every year so far with the Tucker era. So I don't know. Take it from.
I'm also the guy who once wrote in 2018, this could be the most prolific Michigan State offense ever. And it was
that's bad.
It's a bad preview column on, and so I've been, who knows what I know.
Well, I can't kill you, man. Who in the Michigan State fan base doesn't have 1,000 bad takes? I joked the other day, I've gotten every single quarterback controversy, battle wrong. I was all in on Nickel, all in on Terry. It's like I can't get any of these things right. And here we are. We'll see. I didn't want Connor Cook or Cousins as the guy. They both worked out pretty well. But you've been up there for this entire era covering this team in your role as a columnist, and you do reporting as the nature of your work as a columnist as well, in a way that is hard to quantify, but just vibe-wise, this year versus last year, the mood, the sort of energy up there, is there a difference? Because last year was bad, if not energy-wise, just on the field. Do you see a difference in that sense?
Yeah, I mean, I do think there's an optimism. I do think there's it's a group that's been humbled, which is probably a good thing in a lot of ways. That's pretty hungry. What I don't know, and I've covered enough teams where this has gone different ways, is you get a guy like Trey Mosley, who is really good kid, smart guy, doesn't need football for his life to work out, and is now sort of your leader of that group because other people are gone. Is he good enough to be a difference maker or not? Like, is he really, do you have those? Sometimes it's like that sort of, and so the vibe is good, but is the talent there? Is what you don't know with some of these sort of things. The leadership is there, but leadership only gets you so far. At some point, you got to have a guy that causes problems on the defense. But I do think, I think they're healthier. I think they've been humbled, which is always healthy in that sense. And I think in the building there's some hope that they're pretty decent.
They think we're underselling them. That's my conversations with players.
Yeah.
They are aware of the predictions that people like you, they didn't name you, but people like you have. They're aware of what the odds are out there. They've heard those things.
Players always think that, though. Players are the worst critiques and worst evaluators of themselves.
That's fair.
I remember covering a Northern Illinois, Western Michigan game in 2006 with Garrett Wolf and Northern Illinois, like at their peak, won 42-7 in DeKalb, Illinois, frigid day. Western had Greg Jennings, had some good players, and afterwards, the players are like, we just, we weren't. Our intensity wasn't enough. They were coming up with all these sort of bullshit excuses. And the head coach just said, players hate admitting somebody's just bigger, faster, and stronger.
Yeah.
And they don't know how to see it. I've covered teams where they think they have it coming in and they don't. Now, I do think there is a connectedness to this group. I do think a lot of these guys have been part of winning and part of losing, and they know the difference, and they know, why things went wrong last year and how to avoid that. And so I think there's great value in that sort of sweat equity or learned experience.
I'm going on the over your 6-6.
Okay.
So, I'll give you a little extra juice. I already got a bet with Ben. What did we bet, Ben? Like a big cigar, I think was our bet just on the Washington game. He's convinced the Washington game, there's no shot. Like, you're crazy. I don't know, man. I've been watching football a long time. That East Coast, West Coast thing, I believe in it.
No, and if you want a reason to pick the over and think they're going to have a better season, so much of winning in college football comes down to getting 21-year-olds to focus for an entire week and be dialed in. And these guys had enough experiences last year. Like the Washington game, they all went out to Seattle. They all felt that. They'll be dialed in that week, no question. It's their first. But I think just as importantly, like the Minnesota game on the road, week after they play Michigan, lots of opportunities, regardless how the Michigan game goes, for like road game off the radar, Minnesota, late October. And yet they got booed for the first time in their lives at Spartan Stadium against Minnesota. Like they all remember that. They all remember how that felt. And I think that will help them focus in those games. So I think there are moments from last year that will help in terms of the performance they give this year.
We'll see. I'm optimistic and I'm excited. It's kind of like opening day for baseball. I have the Tigers at 100 wins and that lasts for like 6 hours and then it goes out the window. Let's get us to the speed round, then we'll get you out of here. I know it's a long drive for you. Ben, let's run it. All right, Mr. Graham, I don't know, whatever you feel like, 30 seconds-ish. You can go as long as you want, I suppose. New media versus old media. So we put you. It's not you against Justin Thind, who's a buddy of mine. I don't know if you guys.
It's actually not a bad angle. Thank you.
I did not choose that picture. So can we get your eyes open on the next one? So I'll have to tell Eric next time. Can we get his eyes open in the picture? But just the concept, Draymond Green has declared, we're part of the new media. You're in these rooms like with somebody like Justin Thind, who's like an engineer and kind of doing this on the side, and you're a pro's pro, been doing this, and you're in the same room, not doing the same thing, different thing, but you're in the same room, got the notepad or whatever you got. My sense is there's a little bit of a resentment there from the old guard, not specific to the Michigan State beat, like industry-wide. There's a little bit of a pushback. Draymond Green has even mentioned it. They don't like us new guys coming in. What's sort of your take on the dynamic there just generally?
Yeah, it is new. I mean, there are more and more, new media of different forms all the time, and you see it on the MSUB. I've never had an issue. Like I get along with Justin well, and
he's a great guy.
And so yeah, I mean, it doesn't. I mean, the job is different, and so you understand that. And there are times where I think people get frustrated because they run into a situation where, I'll give you an example, and this is specific to Justin, but like the Rainer Saban column, right? That a lot of people are criticizing and I saw Justin had a tweet sort of, but like a lot of the new media, not just Justin, but people in his role, aren't even able to write that column. You know what I mean? Because that would hurt their brand, their sources, what they're doing, and so it is different. It is there are differences, but I don't think they can't coexist. I don't think there should be resentment. I think I think what some people do has great value, and especially in the college game, because part of what drives a lot of things in the college game that would be new media or whatever is a passion for that team. That is, and they're going to work hard to, find sources and do recruiting type stories that maybe old media doesn't have interest in. Like, I'll be honest, if a 15-year-old commits on July 15th and I'm at the lake, I do not give a shit, and I'm pissed. I just don't care. And yet somebody,
neither do I actually, but yeah.
But there are people who do,
yeah,
and that's
many.
a good thing. And there are fans who do, and they serve a fan base, and those things can totally coexist. I don't, but I understand that there can be friction. I just don't necessarily feel it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm a fan of so many people in both camps that I'm kind of neutral on that. I'm a big fan of yours, big fan of Justin's. I know not to pit you guys against each other, but you are new guard, old guard kind of.
Yeah, and there is an independence versus, there's a, and it's not that, different people have different alliances and different roles and different, but there is there's Jim Comparoni who makes his living doing this. I'm not saying he's necessarily new guard, but he wrote a piece about Harbaugh, I think it was after the tunnel incident. And I remember thinking, it wasn't a bad column, but Jim Comparoni criticizing Jim Harbaugh is just predictable. It's like John U. Bacon criticizing Michigan State. Like there are certain things that just, so there are those things where I do think there's a value in the independence, so to speak, and not having, but that doesn't mean I don't see any friction, at least from my standpoint. I don't feel friction there. And I don't have a problem with anybody who does it, because people don't, I have more problems with cameramen who get in my way in the NCAA tournament in the locker rooms and are just like taking up space than anybody else.
We'll move on. Great answer. A lot of people don't know you were actually on the 2013 Rose Bowl team. People don't realize that, the offseason. I want to ask you about that. Your summer workout with the 2013 team that would eventually go on to incredible things, win 13 games. What was that? Put that picture. I haven't even seen that picture yet.
I was in better shape then, too.
Oh, yeah, you and me both, man.
The end of the athletic prime.
Rose Bowl champion Graham Couch. So you went up there, I think it was 2 days with them, or was it?
2 days. Two days, because what happened was I went the first day, and I think they sent me on a day that was going to be manageable, because they were worried this guy's going to die, whatever. And the first day, and that's actually where the photos were taken, all the first day. which the first day was strenuous, but it was a lot more technical work. And I remember at the end of it, it's like, I can't write a column off this. Like, this was not, this was not hard for me. And I was in defense, I was playing a ton of full court basketball at the time. I was in good shape. So I said, you've got to let me come back. And I said, when's a day that would really push me? And they said, well, come Thursday. And that's the day that they run the stadium ramps, run the steps. And that was, that was brutal. I can still hear Ken Manny's voice saying 3 more in terms of loops, and just thinking like I remember coming down the concrete steps at Spartan Stadium thinking I was going to throw up, and then also tumble forward into my own vomit. Like, it was just, I just didn't know how many more I could get through. But I did that originally. The reason I wanted to do that, I did that when I covered Western Michigan. It was like 6 years earlier. And it changes the way the team looks at you. They know what they go through in the off season. They have a respect for you that you stuck it out through the end of that workout. And with guys like Darquez Denard and a number of the players who were on, there was a different vibe and a different conversation that I was able to have that whole year, I thought, because of that. So it was worth doing. If I did it now, I would die, so I wouldn't try it again, even though if I wanted to.
Yeah. I would want at least a little time to prep for that one. But I thought I remembered that from the time, and I'm like, I got to find what year was that?
I was
2013.
I was so nervous. I remember I went out to do a piece. I was in DeKalb, Illinois, doing a couple stories out on Mark Montgomery, like a couple days before. And so I ran gassers on the Northern Illinois field. Like, nobody's around. The coaches can see me out there. They must have been wondering what this, 30-year-old, whatever dude is doing out there. But just to try to make sure that I was physically capable of getting through it.
Oh, you got through it. You're here telling the tale now. Speaking of tales, Mark D'Antonio's sudden retirement. That is something that has been speculated about. I don't know that we really have the perfect answer there. When he releases that statement on Twitter, he announces he's done. What was your reaction? Were you shocked, mildly surprised, not surprised? Where were you at?
Yeah, I try and take myself back to that. I wasn't stunned in the sense that, it had been a rough 2019. And I was writing, it felt like every week I was writing the column like, the hell are they doing here? He's going to have to decide if, he's going to have to not only shake up the staff, but roll up his sleeves and decide he wants to be in this for a while. And I remember writing a column at the end of that season about, like, he can't just, like, the roster is in a place where he can't just say, I want to come back. If he comes back, he's got to know he's got to do it for 3 or 4 more years with high energy. And I think that was a big part of it. I think that as he got away from the season and the frustration of it and the just sort of doing it again, the best joke is that he was paying attention to, like, cable news and reports in China about COVID and was like, I'm getting out of this. This doesn't, but I don't think that was it. I don't think he knew COVID was coming. But and I know that there had been some talks with him in the athletic department just about the direction of things, how much longer he wanted to do it, his staff and things that needed to change. And I think it sort of all, I take him at his word that he was out recruiting a little bit and just realized as he was talking to kids that I don't have this in me. I won't be around when these guys are there. And so I do think there was some of that. I think he ran out of steam and he knew it. And I think that was the first time he knew it. And I think the frustration for him is as late as 2019, and I'll never forget this, at Big Ten Media Days, I have never been more sure that he thought he had a squad that could win. Because if you remember 2018, they had Lewerke had his arm off. And they were, they had no offense, literally. And there was like 7-7 against Michigan and maybe Ohio State deep in the third quarter because that defense was that good. And I think he thought he had that kind of defense, and he thought the offense would be a lot better. He thought he had a team that could contend again. And you could just sense it. He was in a really good place at the beginning of 2019. And when it didn't unfold well, and really after that, that Ohio State second quarter where things went wrong, and then the Wisconsin game where it was a shutout. It was just kind of a train wreck after that. And I think as he got away from it, and when you look at him now, he looks happy and healthy, like a man who made
He's
the right
like younger
decision.
now.
Yeah.
His hair's like got a little more gray, but there's fewer like wrinkles and less wear in his face.
The other thing is his wife wanted him out. So, you know, I really think she was always worried about his health. And that was, you know, so if you don't have a spouse at home saying, no, let's do, you know, if you're going home to, you know, any time was good, you know, then that's, you know, and I don't have any information that she was like demanding you stop, but ever since the heart attack, she had been concerned, and that year was particularly, I think, hard on him, and he looked the part. You're right, he looked much older then than he does now.
Right, aging like a president a little bit. I'm so happy for him. I'm just such a big fan of his, and the best one we've had. You know,
his legacy will get better and better as time we get further and further away from his tenure. Just because the other thing that happens is you just see how hard it is to do what he did. Yeah.
Well, that, and again, in context, when he got there, it was absurd to think they'd even be in it for the Rose Bowl. He was this close to going to 2.
Yeah.
I mean, a hair away from going to 2 in 3 years. So, yeah, he's the man. He's a legend. Tom Izzo, speaking of legends, the Tom Izzo timeline. How many years left for Tom?
It's a good question. You know, the last time I spoke, I think it could be, you know, only like 3, something like that. I'm torn on this. There's part of me that thinks he'll just keep going and he'll die in the court. He says he won't, but you know, the longer he goes, sometimes I think the longer he'll coach. I don't know if he knows what else he'll do. I think he still feels good. There are parts of the college game that I think aren't as fun. Like he's been sort of able to thread this needle right now where you get a big time recruiting class. All your guys stay. You got enough NIL money to keep people happy. But there could become a point where everything that's sort of making it a pain in the ass for every other coach makes it no fun anymore, and he does decide to walk away. And you know, if I had to guess, I would say 3 more years. But you know, I think as long as he thinks he has a team that has a chance to win it too, you know, it's going to be hard for him. What else would he do? I mean, that's the thing about him. He's not, you know, he is not somebody I think who is going to retire easily like D'Antonio. I think he'll struggle with just not doing it.
That second national title in particular, the absence of it. If he gets that
means thing. But I do wonder if he doesn't then think, like, say they get it this year. Say that happens. Say it's the dream season for Michigan State basketball and they win a national title this year. And then you look at the team after that, which all of a sudden looks pretty dang intriguing. Well, why not 3? You know, I can in his head. 2 would be. You know,
he would go there,
right? And so I'll believe it when I see it that he's actually done. But I also think I won't see it coming. Unlike D'Antonio, a little bit. Like I didn't expect D'Antonio to retire when he did. I thought once they got to February, he's going to do another year, like most coaches do. But I think Izzo will truly catch us off guard, and it'll happen at the end of a year, and he'll just decide.
What makes you say that?
Well, I know he doesn't want to do the rocking chair tour stuff. So
he doesn't want to do the farewell tour.
He desperately doesn't want that. And because I think I won't see it different than I do now. Maybe he'll look tired and worn some year, and you'll go, boy, this looks like it might be it. And maybe if he kept coaching 5-6 more years, that would happen. But I think he'll be tired, and I won't see it. I think that's just because I've seen all states of him where he looks frazzled and done, and this is what he does. And I think he likes his role at the school. I think he likes coaching still. I don't know. I just know sort of that blind spot with him. I don't think I will be able to see it.
I tend to agree with you. Yeah, I was just kind of curious for your take on it. I don't think he's going to have this kind of long, drawn out. The D'Antonio retirement stuff, that was a conversation at the end of 2019. Like, he looks like he might want to get out of here.
Yeah, no, yeah. It made sense for him to go, and then he didn't go.
Right.
And yeah, it was the timing of his retirement. You know, didn't help Tucker, didn't help anybody, but it also helped in the sense if he had stuck around and COVID had hit, I'm not sure that goes well for Michigan State either, where they were at that point.
And I'm at a point for whatever issue you had with the timing with Mark D'Antonio, I prefer to just remember him fondly.
Sure.
I mean, there's so much good. It's like, no, I'm not going to focus on that. Maybe I'm a hypocrite for that. I was mad at the time. I don't even want to think about that.
Well, and how many
anymore.
coaches really know when to go out and go out well? It's just a hard thing to do when you've been at the top of your game. And I think the hard thing for D'Antonio was they felt they were really close to something even beyond. And the 2016 class and everything that was happening at Michigan State was just wound up being, it didn't happen. And then 2019, I think he did think he had a squad. I mean, I think if you look at the defenses those last couple of years, I mean, those were elite defenses for a while. Even into 19. I mean, you go to that Ohio State game on the road, quarter and a half. I know they turned it over a couple of times. That was the last time MSU went toe to toe with Ohio State for a little while physically, and then it fell apart. But I think it took him a while to realize, okay, I don't have the roster to do this, and I think that's the other thing. He probably knew this was going to be a little rough.
It seemed to be the end there, but a glorious run it was. Two more quickly. They're kind of the same yin and yang. Most fun MSU athlete to cover in your career? Just that you enjoyed him.
Derek Nix. I had to get Derek Nix in the locker room because you never knew what he was going to say. It was usually going to be fun. Sometimes it was to the detriment of him and his team. I mean, his senior year when they needed him to be a leader, there were a couple tough columns I wrote on him just because he really didn't, I don't think, understood what it meant and what was, to do that. But I mean, he wasn't scared to say anything, and he was always entertaining. He had a great sense of comedic timing, and so yeah, I mean, it was one of my favorite people to talk to in the locker room, and yeah, he's just, I mean, I would say it's him. There have been a number of guys who have been really good to talk to, but just in terms of pure entertainment value is Derek Nix.
R.I.P. to the competition, right? That's his famous quote. Last one, and maybe a little bit of a sour note, but was there one that was difficult for you? Maybe not least favorite, but just a difficult Michigan State athlete to reach where they didn't really want to communicate with the media, and you had a hard time getting to them?
It's a good question. I mean, there have been guys who have not been great quotes. I mean, like Deontay Davis was a struggle, and but it wasn't for his lack of willingness to chat with you. There have been guys who have been less excited to do it. I'm trying to think who would be a really good example of somebody who was just a little. But it's not like the Tigers clubhouse or anything. You're not dealing with Pudge Rodriguez or anything. I mean, they're usually pretty decent. Deontay Davis, at the end, I'll never forget this. I mean, I talked to him several times at Michigan State. Had a couple good one-on-ones. It was sort of pulling teeth, but we get somewhere. And then he is in the same draft as Denzel Valentine. So I'm in New York doing this behind-the-scenes thing with Denzel, and I go to a couple things on him as well. And I wrote a column just about, and especially when he slid into the second round, just sort of the contrast between the two of them. And his people hated it. He didn't like it. But then I really wanted to do a piece when he was in Memphis on him and what life was like. So they were in Indiana, and I went down there. And right away, he's like, it was not Pau Gasol. It was who's Pau Gasol's brother? Marc Gasol.
Yeah,
it's Marc Gasol and Deontay Davis playing like children on the other end of the court. Like, it looked like fun. Like, it was really cool. And Vince Carter had taken him under his wing, and all these sort of things were really good. But I walk in there, and the Memphis PR people are phenomenal, the media relations folks. And they tell Deontay, there's somebody here to see you. And he's sitting on this back bench, and he looks around, and he sees me, and his head just drops. And it was just one of those moments. And we wound up, back then, they had so much access for the NBA. We talked for 20 minutes then. We talked after pregame shoot-around. We talked postgame. He had to spend like a good hour with me. But I'll never forget that head drop of he just wanted nothing to do with me in that moment. And there have been a few postgames where guys just would rather not deal with you. But I think that's where building relationships matters. And some people think Tyson Walker is a tough interview. I don't think Tyson Walker is that tough an interview. He doesn't like being asked the same question repeatedly. But if you get to them one-on-one and you ask and you talk to people like humans, and instead of just this immediate question about the game, you'll get something. I've gotten some really thoughtful conversations out of him.
I love Tyson. I mean, Tyson's been here twice. He is blunt and does not suffer any fools. Like, no. I haven't had the issue, because I wasn't talking to him, hey, what happened in that game, because I haven't been in that capacity. But you can tell, like, he doesn't have any time for bullshit, which I respect that, though. I don't have a problem with that.
No, and you sort of learn the locker room. You learn which guys, like, get Tyson right away. Because if 4 other people have talked to him, he's tired. He doesn't have it. But one of the things that really helped, and this is why you travel on the beat, and, I was the only guy in Portland last year for the PK85. And so every interview out there was one-on-one, including with so they see you all the way out in Portland, and then you're able to have these like more personal conversations. And those are relationships that sort of get built. And then when you're in a locker room, even if they're tired of that moment or they've suffered a bad loss, there's a connection, and they'll handle it in that moment. But yeah, there's I'm trying to think if there's somebody who really. One of my favorite things about Xavier Tillman was that you always felt really dumb asking him a question, because the way his eyes worked, he was thinking what he was going to say, and he gave incredible, thoughtful answers. But his eyes would go back and forth, and you'd start to lose confidence in your own question, and that always sticks out. But he was fantastic as well. And some guys have learned it. Like, I really believe what MSU does in basketball is helpful for those guys in terms of the openness, how many interviews they have to do. I think Izzo does too, the accountability. And some of those guys have gotten a lot better. Denzel Valentine was not great as a junior for a while. And it was Joe Rexroad at some point. I mean, it was his first year kind of as the man, and they weren't having a fun year. It was early in that 2014-15 year. And Joe Rexroad in the locker room just said, hey, man, you got to give us more. Like, we're going to be here every time. Like, and Denzel, to his credit, kind of got it. And he got a lot better the rest of that year. And then he was terrific the next year. But sometimes it takes a minute for those guys.
Yeah, I mean, they are legal adults, but still kids. And
they're humans, yeah. And they're dealing with, I always try to remember when I go in there, and I'm in a great spot. I don't need to talk to you. Like, sometimes if you're a beat writer and this is the story, you kind of need to talk to somebody. If you're in a grumpy mood, if you're rude to me, whatever, I don't need to talk to you. Or if you just look like, I'd rather have the great conversation with anybody that leads to a column than necessarily the guy who scored 20 points in that game that everybody's talking to. And I think that's. But that's the benefit of my role that not everybody has.
A great conversation that leads to a column, which leads to a Mike Valenti rant.
Yeah,
on
something
the
like that.
Top-rated show in the history of Detroit sports market. Man, Graham Couch, I don't know if you realized what night you agreed to come and the timing of it and the fact that it was the night before the opener, but I immediately said yes and turned my phone off so you couldn't back out. But I appreciate you coming here, man. I know it's a drive for you, long day ahead of you, tomorrow. So, coming at all is impressive and appreciated, but in this time and this backdrop of the season, really appreciate you, man. Thank you.
Enjoyed the interview. Enjoyed the conversation. Thanks for having me.
Love to have you back. Graham Couch, Lansing State Journal, awesome columnist, and he'll be down there covering that big opener tomorrow against Central Michigan. I'm excited. I will talk myself into 12-0 by the second Miller Lite at the tailgate in the parking lot tomorrow. Ben is going to the game with me tomorrow. We have like 6 stops to make. We're looking forward to it. We're running through our itinerary, so we're going to do that. Eric, Boxers on your couch, man. Appreciate you. Love you. Spiro Avenue Show. Graham Couch. We'll see you next time. Thanks.